Okay, well,
Can you record this?
I am recording it right now. Just started.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. So we're going to talk about mohair, okay, tonight, and evaluating mohair. I'm going to share some stuff on my computer, and we're going to look through some things, and we'll go from there. How's that? Okay? And anywhere along the line, you feel free to ask me any questions, okay? So just unmute yourself and then pipe in, all right? So mohair does not come from a sheep, it comes from a goat, okay? So there's some goats, a variety of goats that produce mohair. One of those, and there's just some pictures I just Googled so you can see them to bring up, are cashmere goats. Have you heard of cashmere sweaters?
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're super soft. Like, look at this one. This one's got, look at that silky smooth that looks. That's a pretty cool looking one, right? They come in lots of different colors and shapes and sizes as goats, just like sheep do, right? And so they do them just like they do a sheep. The difference between mohair and wool is interesting. Mohair does not shrink near as much as wool does, okay? So the fiber is just a little bit different. But when you evaluate it for like wool judging or mohair judging, it's very similar, okay? So I'll get back to that. But here is some pictures of cashmere goats, so you get a kind of idea of what mohair looks like if you didn't already. And then here's some pictures of some Angora goats. And Angora is the primary producer of, I don't know if that's a good picture or not. Can you guys see those okay?
Yeah.
Okay. That's the majority of mohair typically comes from Angora goats in terms of the amount of the product that's produced around the country. Okay. And we don't have a lot of them in Wyoming, but we do have some. Okay. It almost looks like a Cotswold, doesn't it, Blair?
Yeah.
Right, but there we go. Okay, so there's some Angoras. Okay, now there's two other breeds that they've crossed them with that do a pretty good job of producing mohair. One of them is called a Ngora, which is a cross between a Nigerian and a Angora. There's an example of one of those. It's a little more color in them. Okay. And the other is called a Pagora, that's a cross between pygmy goats and Angoras. Okay. So those are the primary breeds that produce Angora or mohair in general. All right. And so now let's talk about what it looks like itself. So here's an example of just some mohair coming off of an Angora, and you can see how long those fiber. I wish I could pull that picture up even more so. Oh wait, I know I can't. And now it took me the wrong place. I apologize.
You're good.
You're back to seeing this goat?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. And you can see how long those fibers are and how much crimp there is in there, right? There's two basically types of mohair fibers, if you want to call it that, the looks. In wool, we just talk about crimp in general. It's the same thing with the goats, but they typically refer to it as being two different styles. One is ringlet style, okay, and you can see how that looks like it's ringlets, most ringlets. And the other's flat. It's just a little more flat looking than these ringlet locks are. You'll notice how really long a lot of the mohair fibers are. That's just simply because they grow at a pretty quick rate. Usually with mohair goats, it'll grow at about an inch a month. So if you've got a goat that's 10 months old, you can imagine you would have some really, really, really long mohair on it in theory, okay? Compared to sheep that they just don't grow at that rate, which is pretty cool. And that's one of the reasons people like growing them. Besides, they're a small animal, but they can produce this. There's a whole different market for this mohair in general, okay? They classify mohair into some different categories, okay? They usually refer to them as kids, and those are usually because the goats come off of those younger age goats, right? And kids, their mohair is typically softer, okay? It doesn't have to be that way. In fact, a kid fleece or a kid, fleece doesn't have to necessarily come from a kid-aged animal. They can produce them the other way around, but typically that's how they kind of classify them, is into those areas. Okay. So they usually call them kid 1 and then kid 2, and then they have the adult versions of it as well too. So it doesn't really matter which category they're in, but that kind of helps you understand that when they're younger versus being older, they produce a finer, softer type of mohair. Okay. Then, so here's an example of some mohair that, and I'm going to pull up this because this is a really good picture of what that kid mohair looks like. It usually is typically pretty luster, pretty shiny, and it's super, super, super soft. And if wool is super, super, super soft, what does that usually mean? Huh? Is it coarse and hard, or is it fine? If it's soft.
Usually coarse.
No, not if it's soft.
It's usually fine.
Usually fine. And then in sheep, it has grease. So that's sometimes how we think it's softer too. Mohair has the same thing. It still has some grease to it, but not near like it does in sheep, okay? So the softness is one way of really determining whether it's finer or not. In fact, in a lot of the contests they'll have, you won't have a whole fleece. You won't have let me get out of this picture. You won't have a whole bag of a fleece. You might just have a handful like that, and that's all you're evaluating, is just a little handful. And so a lot of mohair is about picking it up and feeling how fluffy and light it is and how soft it is, okay? But the two main factors in evaluating mohair are still going to be similar to wool. They're going to be fineness, okay? And then with the fineness comes the evenness in the crimp being fine, the fibers being the same thickness, right? And then staple length is the second biggest. Why does staple length matter?
In wool, it matters to see like what it gets made into, like whether it's a carpet or a sweater.
Yeah, because when they go to put it on the loom, it's easier to get more of it. The longer the staple and the finer it is. That's the same for mohair. The finer, the better. So here's a picture of some mohair that's been dyed. I'm assuming this has been dyed, because you can dye them lots of different colors as well, okay? Just like you can wool. All right. Interesting, I thought this was funny, is a lot of, so here's what some ringlet mohair looks like, and this is probably right off of a mohair sheep, and they turn around and put that on what?
A doll?
Doll hair. A lot of doll hair. High-end dolls especially have finer mohair. Coarser or lower-end dolls use this coarser stuff because they can do it. It comes because it already has some of that wrinkle to it, right? It already has the crimp to it, so they can make them look nice without having to do a whole lot. Okay? There's an antique doll with a ringlet mohair already attached to it. Pretty cool. Not that that's its primary use. I just found it interesting that that's one of the uses, that you usually don't put wool on a doll like that to show their hair. Okay? But here's a picture of the fibers. This fiber is a ringlet. You can see how it goes back and forth and back and forth. And this one's more of what they call a flat type mohair. And it's much more like wool. It just has a crimp in it, but it's not near as pronounced and back and forth this way as that ringlet format, okay? Between the two of those, if you're looking for something, okay? The other piece I wanted to show you is this is some examples of what mohair looks like after it's been used in a variety of different things, outcome products, but dyed. So these are some throws, right, that have been made out of mohair and dyed a bunch of different colors. So that's no different than wool as far as that goes. Let me go see if there's a couple other examples. Yep, see, there's some yarns that are made out of mohair, just like they would for wool, okay? So they turn them into the same output products as they do wool, but the softness usually of mohair is what gives us its added value, okay? But when you're evaluating it, you're gonna take it and feel for softness, and you're gonna pull the fibers apart just like you do for wool and try and look how big around those fibers are. I think you both were at the wool workshop that they did here a month or two ago, where we used the licorice to show how to look at the fibers, right, for thickness of the fibers. Same thing applies. You want finer, thinner, smaller around the better, and the longer the better. So if you get two that are really, really close in terms of how fine they are, you want to go with the one that's longer stapled in terms of placing one over the other. But always start with fineness first, okay? And I don't have any to sit here and show you. If somebody wanted to see a scorecard of what the importance is, uniformity, okay, and fineness is in there. Then there's the adult. There's like shows the kid the grades there too. Kid 1, kid 2, adult 1, adult 2, adult 3. Those are just the grading categories similar to what we were doing for 3/8, quarter blood, half blood, right? Or 58s, 56s, 54s. In Mohair, they break them into kid 1, kid 2, adult 1, adult 2, adult 3, based on their fineness. Okay. Staple length is important. You see, it's 20% of it, and then these others are less important, just like in wool, but matter in terms of the character, the softness, their yield, their purity. Those are all kind of minor. Now, it does talk about softness down here for being harsh handling, but it's not that important. But I'm telling you that when you feel it, if it's soft, it tends to be smaller diameter and finer. So you have to really be careful of that. If you pick it up, just like wool, if you pick up some coarse wool and you feel it, it usually feels pretty harsh versus some finer, softer wool. In mohair, you can feel some that feels really dry and harsh, but when you pull it apart and look at those fibers, they're really, really fine because those environmental things are different, our factors are different. Typically, because of how long those fibers are, they tend to get less grease and less VM collected into them. Again, if they're in muddy or dirty situations, they still do it, but their fibers in general tend to get less amounts of that than wool. Mohair doesn't caught, or I mean, it can caught if you want to call it that, but it doesn't. What's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't felt. So when you get it all wet and mush it all together, it doesn't felt like wool will. Okay, so because of that, the fibers tend to stay longer and drier, and so the softness of it is less of a factor, but it is an indicator when you're picking up and feeling them. In fact, they used to judge a lot of mohair shells simply by that, which one's softest, because they would mix Angoras or Cashmeres, and it was just mohair in general. Now, for your contest, I have no idea, like if you're going to go to the Denver one, how they're planning to do that. I have seen it done where they actually put the full clip, the full fleeces out, just like they do wool, and I have seen it where they put them in like little, for lack of better words, rabbit boxes, you know, where they have the individual little stalls for rabbits, but these are smaller, and it literally is just a little cubby hole with a handful of mohair. Then you feel it, and look at it, and put it back and feel it, and then go to the next one. But you're still going to want to evaluate it for other fibers, you know, to see, make sure that there's not other fibers in there, like Kemp, that can mess it up, like there was in wool. Okay, so it's not much different. But so that's where I'll leave it with my information. Then I'll just ask any questions you might have about it. Or I can go back to some pictures too if you want me to go back to any of those.
Jonathan, how does weight play into it?
Great question. It still is an important factor because they still get paid by the weight. But that's also one of the differences you're going to see depending on how they give you the fleeces. If they just give you the samples, then weight will be zero factor. Don't even put it into play. Base it simply on length and fiber diameter, luster, and the rest of those character, but mostly fineness, right? If they give you the whole fleece, then yes, the weight will matter, so you still will look for VM and oil like you would in the others. But just like wool, it gets paid by the pound, okay? So if you have a difference in the weights between those fleeces, if they give you the whole thing, they're typically put them in bags, plastic bags too. So you might have to just pick up the whole bag to feel for the weight difference, because it doesn't, you know, it doesn't roll together in a nice fleece you can tie up. It's usually just loose in a bag. So you can pick up the bags when you're evaluating to determine weight. Great question. Other questions? I think these little Nigoras, these crosses, are pretty cute little buggers. That was pretty short and sweet.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. I learned a lot.
Okay, well, if you
Thank you.
it's not much different. So the fact that you guys have done that before helps. So. No, you want to stay on and ask more stuff or call it good?
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
All right. Well, then we'll
Thank
call
you.
it a day.
Will you email that so Cooper can watch it
The video?
tonight?
Yep.
Yeah.
I will. As soon as it gets done, I'll post to YouTube and I'll shoot your mom a link.
Okay. Thank you.
As long as
Can
you
you
share
email
it.
to us too?
Yeah, I was going to say, you better share it, though, okay?
Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Talk to you
Bye,
later, guys.
Jonathan. Thank you.